there needs to be a really open conversation about succession. And succession is not just about who's running a business in the coming years, who's owning that business, and how are we doing that?
Right.
What's that transition process look like?
Hey everybody, and welcome to the Exit Is Now podcast with me, your host, Scott Snider. I'm hanging out with my buddy Mike, who came in from Philadelphia. Many of you that are in the Certified Exit Planning Advisor community likely know Mike, likely have been taught by Mike. What's interesting is you might not know this, since joining our CEPA faculty, let's call it full-time in the virtual world, 2020, 21, 22, and now 23, you've probably educated over 3,000 certified exit planning advisors.
No kidding.
So there's probably like 3,000 people that know your face. They're like, oh, that's the guy that taught me the family stuff in CEPA. So pretty big impact, at least on the EPI community, for sure.
That's fantastic. But, I didn't know that.
Yeah, if you think
it's so
about
funny. I was at a college reunion, and some guy came up to me. I haven't seen him in like 20 years yet. And he says, I saw you teaching this class.
Yeah.
It was great.
We get that. It's like a lot of our faculty, it's so weird in that kind of virtual component, right? Where they watch a video series in the morning, and then you get on that faculty meetup in the afternoon, and you only get to hang out with them for about an hour, hour and a half.
Yeah.
But then they see you out in the world, or like when I go to a chapter launch, people are talking to me like they know me.
Yeah.
And they do in a sense, because I'm a pretty open guy. So watching the video or seeing me in a faculty meetup, I just don't have that personal interaction back with them, right?
Right.
They just listen to me talk. But nonetheless, Mike, as I said, teaches the family business module, a part of our Certified Exit Planning Advisor program, and has taught it way before it was even virtual. Kind of like a career-long family enterprise and family business guy. And I would say that it was as we were walking home or back to our cars from our breakfast this morning, I said, you've had more of an impact on me and my dad and our family business than you probably know, with some kind of key terms and just the things that you do that are ever so slightly change the way you think, that have then sparked a conversation with me and dad. So as I told you as well, the show Exit Is Now is really all about, at least in our first season here, all about how the people and the topics that come to sit at this table have affected me as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, as a family business owner. So officially welcome to the show, and thanks for coming in from Philly.
Thanks so much for having us.
So I want to dive in. So let's go like all the way back to the early days, 25 something years ago.
Yeah. When
you had started your consulting practice, I believe it was, and you had this focus on family business, family enterprise. And maybe it's just me, I just find it super unique that you concentrate on family business kind of out of the gate. And so over that 25 years, though, the question that I have is, how much have you seen the family enterprise or family business change? Because the generations have changed, certainly over 25 years.
Yeah, great question. And I'm not sure that family business, quote unquote, has changed over 25 years. But to your point, there are fundamental changes in our economy. We see companies that struggle with, how do I compete with China? How do I compete with Walmart? And that's one issue. But the other issue you're raising is really, how have generations changed? And we hear a lot. I teach a course at a university, and I hear a lot of senior generation, the boomers, talk about Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, and the loss of sort of the American culture. And I can understand that from a boomer perspective. But I'm telling you, the young folks that we see that I teach at the university level as undergrads and grad students, and the young folks that we know and work with, hundreds and hundreds of family businesses are coming in. They are smart, they are hardworking, they care about their employees, they care deeply about the business, about their communities, and they think and act differently. I mean, that is just a reality, and that's tough for boomers. It's tough for anybody. But I mean, if you just think about for 30, I'm 56, for 35, 40, 50 years, we had a phone. And in our house, you probably had one too. It was connected with a cord, and it had a long cord. You get to walk like 3 miles around. But that was it for like 40 years. My kids change their phones every 6 months, every 4 or 5 months. I mean, it's the pace of change is so rapid. Is that bad? It's just different.
It is
different. So I would
yeah.
just say that how's it changed? The generational expectations, how we think, how we act, how we, our beliefs about society, et cetera, are just different.
So why did you enter this space 25 years ago and say, that's what I want to do? I want to work with families. Because I think it's actually pretty complex. So 25 years ago, you jump in and say, I want to start a whole business that focuses on these folks.
Yeah, I was working on Wall Street, but I had a chance to live and work in the Dominican Republic. I tell the story often for the folks who take it.
This is a great story.
Great. I love it. So one of the, as you know, Scott, I went from working on Wall Street to living on the Dominican-Haitian border. Living in a shack, no electricity, no running water. One of the first loans we made was a group of 3 women who were buying chickens and were wholesaling chickens basically. But they had this strange inventory shrinkage problem, which only showed up on Mondays, not Wednesday, Friday. Okay. And it turns out that the story, one of the husbands was a drunk, and he would go to the chicken fights, come back. There's no 7-Eleven, there's no McDonald's. You got the munchies, you raid the chicken coop, and the women are like, lo siento, Miguel, we don't know what's going on. The real issue was, that experience for me hit home because I grew up in a family business. My family business had a construction company and it failed. It failed for a lot of, as I often say, typical family business reasons, including the Irish curse of alcoholism. That business in the Dominican-Haitian border was struggling because of a family-related issue. It wasn't that these 3 women weren't working hard. They were busting their tails. They were sharp businesswomen. Yeah. There was a family issue that was fundamentally impacting their ability to compete. They didn't know how to address it. And that mix, to me, of family, families are wonderful and loving and caring and bring joy, and families bring pain. And business is exciting, and we can be passionate about it, and it's really tough. And you mix those 2 things together, you get a really special soup. And I talk about, when we're educating, we're talking to folks, we know, research shows that family businesses outcompete non-family firms in the long term. And they are challenged by this dynamic of how our family works together. So the great thing about family business, family enterprise, is that wonderful mix of things that are incredible in our lives and at the same time painful.
Yeah. So what is that too? Is that like a communication problem?
Yeah.
So what's that big issue when you get in there, right? Is that mom and dad and son and daughter or brother and sister can't communicate?
Yeah. I mean, so on occasion, to your point, sometimes Walmart's coming to town and we just get run over, or the China price, we can't compete. But more often it is the challenge of how we communicate openly, honestly, how we create boundaries, how we create accountability in families, how we build a meritocracy. And that is tough because in our family, we're sitting around the dinner table, everybody gets same number of strawberries or blueberries or jelly beans, because we love each other all the same. And then you walk into the business and you're getting the job, she's not, she's getting more pay than you are, she's more qualified, by the way, you're fired. That is really tough for families, but that's what's required. And when family businesses fail, to transition effectively, often that's the case. It's around how do we manage this dynamic between our business and our family and communicate about it. That's tough.
I can tell you it's something that Dad and I practice all the time. Like it is.
You guys never fight?
No, never fight. Never have a disagreement. I can tell you though, Mike, we have come a long way because we did. We used to fight more often than not, and now today it's more of a constructive dialogue around where we're going. And I have different theories around this. I was telling you pre-show that I've had a couple of family business people in here. I've had a couple of my buddies that own family businesses with their dads and their uncles that are 3rd generation. And I think one of the differences, and maybe you agree, maybe you don't, it'd be interesting to see your opinion. It's because I think one of the reasons is because I have skin in the game. So Dad's not looking at me as like I've built this thing and I'm going to give it to my son one day when I'm ready to take the full step away. But right now he's the manager here or the president or the vice president, whatever title it is, but he's not an equal. He's not an owner. He's my son, and he might be critical to the success of the overall business operations and growth, but he's not an owner, so I'm still going to treat him as almost like a step down. I'm going to treat him like my son, not necessarily as my partner. Yeah. In talking to my buddies that were on the show, too, I don't know if they felt that way, but there was a sense where after the show we sat around and said that was a key difference, Scott, is like, though we know we're going to take over our family business one day, I don't own anything right now, but I own 49% of EPI. So Dad looks at me, maybe as son sometimes still, certainly as like the president of the company who's in charge of the people, the growth, the P&L. But at the table when we sit down, he can't just debate me and roll over me. Now, he does have control at 51%.
Still.
But I have a voice and a vote, right? So even though I might get outvoted, I'm more of an equal to Dad. And I think that, I don't know if that's the reason, so maybe you could talk about that. And I don't know how we fix that necessarily, because as we talked pre-show too, if I owned a business that was $40 million and say it was worth $20 million, how the hell is the next generation affording that thing? So how do you actually get to buy in when you're 3 generations removed from the founder? And the business is huge now.
Yeah. So when you got the technical issue of how do I actually buy, what does it look like? But the challenge for successor generation folks, and you and your father did it. So let me back up a second. What were the big fights you and your dad would have early on?
Oh gosh, man, I would say strategic direction, right?
Oh, okay.
So, and I would also say youthfulness, right? So it's like today the EPI leadership is still young, 31 and a half years old between the 6 of us that lead EPI.
Wow.
So pretty young group.
That's a young crowd.
If you rewound, call it, let's go pre-pandemic 2018, we didn't have the proof yet that this 31 and a half year old team, much younger back then, could do what we wanted to do. And you can imagine my dad coming out of corporate America, then into small business, then becoming a CEPA, and then consulting other small business owners, then saying, I want to take everything I got, throw it into EPI, do it with my son, and son, I want you to lead the growth strategy. He's got all his eggs in one basket. So right, you'd imagine
he went in hard.
It wasn't necessarily, if you asked Dad, it would be interesting. I don't know if it was as much about us as it was about his own fear of losing, right? So he was a little bit more protective. I think the big thing that happened was the pandemic, and when we transitioned the business with little support from him, he was like, this team's got the grit, the creativity, the camaraderie, the culture to get through the toughest time I think he's ever seen in his career, in his life.
Yeah.
So I think that moving into 21, that's when Dad started to relinquish the reins a little bit. And not to get down a rabbit hole, but I think that Dad also had a little bit of the personal side of what we talk about at EPI, right? The business person and financial. By relinquishing control of the business and putting it in my hands and our team's hands, it allowed him to do the estate planning, the financial planning, and personal planning that I think he always wished he had done.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Plus, he became a new grandfather that year. There was a bunch of stuff going on in Dad's life that he needed the time to go do personal.
Yeah.
So I think that stars are kind of aligned, I guess, for us. Yeah. But in the early days, pre-pandemic, it was really more about strategic direction of the company and how we might be walking that path, or tactical decisions that need to be made that we just disagree on, right? It's just, I have a different leadership style than he has. I'm more casual. I'm more, it's just different. And it's just different generationally, and I think different because of our career paths.
Yeah.
But we would challenge on, is that the right direction? But Dad and I have always had a really nice relationship because we invest in our relationship outside of business.
That's
like
huge.
we don't leave. Like, I think a lot of times in family business, the relationship sucks with father and son in business because they have a shitty relationship outside of the business. So it's like, how? So if me and you aren't related, but if me and you wanted to own a business together, but we didn't like each other outside of the business, how the hell are we going to run a great business together, right? So I think down a rabbit hole, but
I mean, you hit a couple things. One is also, so if you and I are in business together, there's an implicit understanding what the boundaries are, and we need to continue to work on clarifying those. But there's implied stuff that you will say to your brother, your dad, that you would never do or say to me, because and part of the challenge in families is that, and when folks go from the dinner table to the boardroom, or in which we're creating real accountability and real expectations, that's a challenge. I think, number one. Number two, why don't some of these things, we talk often about this idea of peership. And what we say in terms of peership and just developmentally, we want to get to a place with our children. This is my goal as a parent. This is just my goal. My goal as a parent is to get to a place of peership with my children as soon as possible. And peership doesn't ignore the reality of a hierarchy, But in peership, we are seen and we work together as equals. For example, in this room right now, there is a hierarchy. You are making the calls right now. If you say this meeting is over, it is over. It's not my call.
Yeah.
But we are engaged in a peer-based discussion. You value my opinion, I value yours. We're having a conversation back and forth, et cetera. And that can be really tough for parents to transition to a place of peership where I see you are my son, but I see you as a peer. I treat you as a peer. That doesn't mean that I've not making the final call. So that's part of the challenge also. The final thing I'll say is for folks like your buddy is it is a challenge for the next generation to come to the table and begin having an intentional conversation about what does transition look like. And that's hard because sometimes it feels like your buddy feels like he's trying to glob onto something his dad created and doesn't feel worthy of having the conversation or fill in the blank, whatever the issue is. But our point to next generation folks like your buddies is there needs to be a really open conversation about succession. And succession is not just about who's running a business in the coming years, who's owning that business, and how are we doing that?
Right.
What's that transition process look like?
Yeah, right.
So succession is really two things. It's ownership succession and management succession. And becoming, look, at the end of the day, if I'm afraid of doing something, I've got fear, and I'm not talking about sticking my hand in the burner, but fear of something in our working relationship, that's a big indication. I got to walk towards that.
Yeah, right. And walking towards your fear is the hardest
part.
But that peership, when you asked me what was some of the issues Dad and I had in the earlier days, it's probably a little bit of that if you think about it, right?
Yeah.
Like, again, young guy, a young team. And I guess it would be interesting for you to interview Dad on this podcast to see what the answer is. But yeah, it's like, that's my son and he runs a really good business and I'm trying to treat him like a peer, but he just he's not. He's 30 years younger than me. He's my son. He's a kid, and so, man. But I honestly think that I really do think if you were sitting here and you asked Dad, I think that it was the proof in the pudding, right? He wanted to see what we were capable of. And I think Dad would now say that he's got a kick-ass team at EPI, super gritty, super creative, super together, and we showed proof to him.
So that's key. That's the other part of going from intuitive to intentional for folks like your buddies. Look, Dad, what is it that we've got to do to change this business or grow it or improve it, or give me a project. Let me show you I've got the goods, or our team has got the goods. Let us, in your case, you described the pandemic. Yeah. I remember getting a call from you 4 weeks into the pandemic. Yeah. Hey man, we're not doing anything you got to drive over to here. We're going online. Yeah. That was a quick pivot. So that was amazing as an organization.
For our audience, if you don't know Mike, in March of 2020, that would have been, right?
That's right.
I guess it would have been like late February because we debuted the new CEPA program end of April. So it was about 45 days we built this whole thing.
Wow.
But why Mike always has a special place in my heart outside of the knowledge that we've gained from him as a family enterprise advisor is during that pandemic, I said, Mike, I just canceled Atlanta, so you don't need to fly there anymore. We canceled Cleveland. You don't have to fly here anymore. And then we canceled Chicago in May. So the next 3 months, you're off the hook for CEPA because everything's shut down.
Right.
But we still need to host CEPA, so we're working on a new style of product. Once it's through the concepts, I'd love for you to fly into Cleveland and teach your module here in the studio that we had set up to debut what would become the CEPA online program back then called the CEPA Masterclass.
Oh, that's right.
And without a hesitation, Mike said, I'm on it, man. I get it. I understand you're in a jam. I can't fly, but I'll drive in from Philly, record my 2-hour session, and then drive all the way home. So I'm like, me and my dad and the team at EPI have always been like, Mike, thanks, man, because you really helped us put that thing together. But 45 days later, we debuted that.
You did it.
So it was pretty wild.
Yeah.
So I want to take a quick break. And when I come back from that break, I want to talk about the flip side. So some of the stuff that we were talking about is these almost like negativities that prohibit family business. But you mentioned, and maybe the audience picked up, that family-controlled and owned businesses typically then outperform non-family business. So there's got to be more positive than negative.
There is, no doubt.
So we'll be back after just a quick break.
The Exit Planning Institute is the authority in exit planning. With its award-winning process, the value acceleration methodology, provides deep insights into how to help business owners create more significant companies while blending and aligning their business, personal, and financial goals. EPI brings together the world's most elite exit planning advisors to form the EPI community. The EPI community represents over 15,000 professional advisors worldwide, including its 5,000 certified exit planning advisors. These advisors include financial advisors, growth consultants, CPAs, attorneys, M&A advisors, amongst others, who come together to expand their knowledge, create and innovate, network and relationship build, grow their practices, and better attract and engage business owner clients. Join EPI today and gain access to the community, content, courses, credential, and conference that you as the professional advisor need in order to harness the opportunity with small to lower middle market business owners who strive to grow a company of significance, thus having a highly valuable and transferable company. Follow the Exit Planning Institute on LinkedIn and visit earncepa.com to learn more about the community leading the exit planning profession.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Exit Is Now podcast. So I want to continue this family conversation with Mike here. And so right before the break, we were talking about some of the issues that might kind of come into your family business, but we also, and we kind of glided past it, but it's a statistic that you actually use inside of the CEPA program too that I think is very interesting around eventually family-owned companies will outperform the non-family-owned companies. Is that true?
Yeah, if you look at statistics around fundamental performance indication, long-term profitability, return on assets, over the long term, family firms that are still run by the founder, but are in transition, are outcompete non-family firms across the board.
Why is
every critical? There's a bunch of different theories, right?
Okay.
One is that our name is hanging on the shingle out front, so it is just more meaningful.
That's fair.
But at the end of the day, number two, we're committed to it. So there's a level of commitment. There's a culture, and people talk about culture all the time, and what is it? And it can seem like a nebulous thing, but man, when you talk about how the folks that work here are like family for you, you treat them like family, you love them like family. And whether you got 25 employees or 3,500, the reality is employees feel that.
Yeah.
They really do. And families do a remarkable job. I highlight all the time a company in Philadelphia in which their core values are hanging from the ceiling. And they are about our word, our witness, and our people. And every single day, those employees get together. They're UAW workers in a manufacturing business, but they all pray. This is United Auto Workers. All take a break. First 10 minutes of every shift, they're in prayer. And why? The answer is because it is a part of the core values of the family, their faith. And if you're not a person of faith, you can stay in the locker room. So nobody's forced to do it. But the bottom line, so what? So what? Productivity of their company is double any other company in the industry. Turnover is like significantly lower. We did a case study on them, and I can't remember the stats now, but the amount of money they spend or save because turnover is so much lower is incredible. And people are recruiting other family members to come work there. It's an amazing place because that family has taken their core values and pushed them down to the shop floor. Productivity, turnover, all critical measures of competitive success are improved.
Yeah, and you would think about that too. And I guess that's kind of how we are too, but we're a family business. Right?
You are.
So, but if you could think about if the non-family business owner listening to the show can take some of the examples from the family-owned business, like you could have a great set of core values in a non-family business and push them all the way down on the shop floor.
You sure
can.
To
your point, maybe it's not as intentional because it's not maybe as, to your point, meaningful. I laugh when you say the name on the front door. So if you were to come to the EPI offices, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but when you come into the EPI offices, this is Exit Planning Institute, but the building says Snider Premier Growth. And I don't know if it's I haven't seen it yet, but we have like a Cintas contract, right? Like clean the bathrooms, switch out the rugs.
Yeah.
And on the rug, it used to say Snider Premier Growth, but we've switched it out because we've all really, since pandemic, really fallen into like, we're exit planning. That's how we identify. We're EPI. Yeah. We're not SPG. We're really EPI.
Yeah.
And then as the EPI has grown, right, most of the employees that were around in the SPG days have focused 100% of their time on EPI.
Gotcha.
But the one thing that hasn't changed is still on the brick outside. It says Snider Premier Growth. They're like, Scott, we're going to change that too. I'm like, no, don't take that off.
Yeah.
But it's because it's the family's name on the shingle. So I laughed at that because you see your name. When I walk in, I see my last name on that building, and I just feel like maybe a deeper sense of responsibility. I don't know.
No doubt. I mean, you look at stats. How long does the average CEO of a publicly traded company last? I think the stat's like 3 to 5 years, maybe. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah.
But how long does the average CEO of a family-owned firm last?
20.
As long as you're alive.
Life cycle.
Exactly. So the culture isn't changing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And publicly traded firms, it's the flavor of the month.
Even and perhaps any large corporation like that, certainly maybe publicly traded, whether it's the CEO or any other C-suite, or maybe even at the president and like a next management level.
Yeah.
Maybe more turnover. So it's hard to drive culture home in those larger companies, I guess. Yeah, I see what
no
you're
doubt
saying.
about it. And the other thing, we've talked about this before, but also this idea of patient capital. So with large companies that require substantial capital investment, so many family businesses out there on the manufacturing side or any other business that requires significant capital. If you look at where and how CEOs spend their time, we know they spend a significant amount of time talking to analysts on a weekly, quarterly basis about what our earnings are going to be. When you're running a privately held, family-owned firm, you have an incredible opportunity. You don't have to worry about that. Who are your shareholders? Are your family members? You have an obligation to meet with them and give them the information they should have. But if you do a good job of keeping them informed, give them the rights and responsibilities they should have as owners, you have an opportunity for them to be patient with their capital and be able to invest in the long term.
Yeah.
Which is an amazing, hard to quantify.
Yeah.
But we would argue that you, as an owner operator of a family-owned firm, you can drive down your cost of capital by investing in your shareholder group, giving them the information they should have. And if you do that, their perception of risk goes down because they're comfortable. Where are you taking the business? Oh, I understand. They're doing this. We're investing in China or going to Mexico, whatever it is. We understand. We're going to stick in. We're with you. We got your back.
So let's dive into some terms, and I want to bring up terms with also the mindset or framework, that terms that have also I loved, that have allowed me and Dad to be better business owners together, right? So starting at the top, you use this term familyness. Kind of where it started. I think it's like and if you looked in your CEPA stuff, the kind of the basics of family enterprises, you kind of start with defining that. So what does that mean to you? Or what's the definition?
Yeah, it's a good question. Familyness is, from a business perspective, and I think it's the coolest thing is, if you think about the first question is, does our company have a competitive advantage? And that's a holy grail of any company, want to have a competitive advantage. And if you ask 100 family, business owners, they're all going to raise their hand. Oh yeah, we do. But in reality, do they really? But if you're a family-owned firm and you can do something, if you can create you can manage costs, create a special product, a service, something that is different, and it's tied to the fact that you are family owned and operated, you have by definition something that is unique in the marketplace that customers will pay for. That is by definition a competitive advantage. And if it's tied to your family because of the culture or whatever it is, you have a familyness advantage. And that's the holy grail. And if business owners can think about, or what are the things that we do really, really well, what is at its core? What is the core resource or capability that allows us to do that? It's a tough concept to get our head around because it's hard to hone down. But if you can do that, I think it's a challenge for any business owner. And if that thing is tied to the family, like it's patient capital or an incredible culture or a team environment, a family environment, which people are willing to work on Saturday mornings, whatever that is, that's tied to a family, you have a familyness advantage. It's that unique mix of resources and capabilities that come together with a family-owned and operated firm.
So then the other thing that I think is probably one of the biggest mindset shifts I think all family business owners need, but certainly something Dad and I talk more often now than ever before about, is this shift in mindset from I'm a family business to I'm a family enterprise. It's a question we get a ton in the EPI community. And one that to me is like, when I first heard you talk about it, it was like this aha moment, although it's kind of a simple flick of a switch in terms of understanding it. And then like today at breakfast, we were talking too about the next generations of wealth.
Yeah.
So that business might actually go away, and the kids might have a lot of wealth from mom and dad. But they don't have the business. So define for me family business versus family enterprise, and kind of talk to that concept, because I think it's a huge mindset shift for a lot of family owners.
Yeah, and so family business, family enterprise, there's a mindset, and there's no right or wrong, right?
Yeah.
So that's step one. Step two is there are families out there that think of themselves as a production unit. We make beer, we make tables, we sell a service. This is what we, as a family, that's what we do. And there's a lot of great families out there that do that. I mean, I'm from Pennsylvania. The oldest brewery in the country is the Yuengling Brewery. They're a family. What do? They make beer. We're a production unit. That's what we do. Great. That's not right or wrong, but you have an opportunity. And I think in the CEPA world, it's really critical. If I, as a family, am a production unit, if we as a family, we're a family that makes beer, I'm not really interested in exit. Because if I exit,
because I identify with making beer.
Because that's exactly right. If we can begin thinking of ourselves, yes, as a production unit, that's what we do on the day job, but as a family ownership group, as a shareholder group, we think of ourselves as an economic unit. Where and how can we create social and economic wealth? Part of it is clearly in the business. But you know what? If we think of ourselves as an economic unit, if we happen to decide to sell the business, we haven't failed. We've simply transitioned asset classes from we make beer, and now we've got some cash, and we can still, as a family economic unit, we can create social and economic unit wealth together. And when we think like that, we are then an enterprising family. Part of the key to become an enterprising family is we have to understand the difference between what it is to be in management and production and what it means to be a shareholder. And as a family member, and begin teasing those apart. If we do that effectively, and part of our job as a family is to be an enterprising family, the other thing that's exciting is maybe we don't sell the business, but we're throwing off some cash. We can still do a lot of really cool things together as a family, as a family enterprise. You think about the buckets of wealth that a family might have. We have an operating entity. We probably have real estate. You and your dad probably own some real estate.
Yeah.
You might have some artwork. You might have a boat. You got a mobile home. You have a place on the shore. All these different buckets. It could be artwork. Families have them. If you think about philanthropy as an example, for families that are multi-generational, if each one of those buckets are opportunities for engagement with the family, to think about strategically, and then we're an enterprising family. I don't have to be working here to be a constructive member of the family. I share the story all the time, like the hardware business, multiple locations across the country. They think that they're hammers and nails. Their largest asset on their balance sheet, I tell the story, is real estate. They never thought about real estate as a strategic asset.
Yeah.
And one of their sons wasn't interested in running the hardware store, had a real passion for philanthropy. So, you got a bunch of kids, third, fourth, fifth generations. We could focus on real estate. We can focus on philanthropy. We think about that entire portfolio of assets as a place to create social and economic wealth. It's opportunistic.
Well, you can have family then working in any one of those.
Exactly.
Right? So
that's exactly right.
They could be running the charitable aspect. You could be running the operating. You could be running the real estate.
Exactly.
And I remember you talking and to Dad and I about this. And we're probably hanging out at the Atlanta CEPA program or Chicago CEPA program.
Yeah, it's Atlanta.
And because it's funny because Dad always reminds me too, right? When we started Snider Premier Growth, that's really was Dad's intent. That Snider Premier Growth, and if you look, and probably people don't even know this, I don't know if I've ever really shared this. The Snider Premier Growth logo has a circle with looks like two backward Z's in it, but they're actually to resemble a big S and a little s. Chris Snider, the dad, Scott Snider, the son.
Wow. Cool.
But it's flipped, right? So you would never know because it doesn't look like an S and it doesn't really look like a Z. It's kind of a backward Z.
Okay.
But one is bigger than the other. One fits inside the other. So that represents the relationship for me and Dad, father and son.
Cool.
And if you think about that, at least back then, we were thinking about Snider Premier Growth as an entity that could own stocks, could own real estate, could do charitable work, could own some operating entities. And that really was the family enterprise, the family unit. But I do think, I think it's a hard mindset shift because you identify as the beer maker.
Right.
Like when I transitioned my landscaping company, I fell into that where I was like, I'm Scott the landscaper. Like even know much else, and you can imagine like my buddies that came in. So one of my buddy Rick, who was on the show, really cool story. He's third generation in this big heavy trucking company, but his grandfather, who started the business, actually had a printing company. And when he grew and had to move, he had to move these old school, like massive printing machines. And he didn't trust anybody in moving them, so he bought his own truck to move them. And thus, a heavy trucking shipping company was born.
There you go.
And he started doing that and then gave the business to his two sons. So he worked with his uncle and his cousin, too.
Okay.
And then that business was passed down and passed down. But if you asked if Rick or my buddy Joe were sitting here as our family business third generation examples, they would not probably understand. That's probably like so foreign to them to think like, yeah, I guess with the money we make in our business, we can go invest in other things outside of business. Thus, I have a family enterprise. Like I was like, Joe, do you think your son will be fourth generation manufacturing? And he goes, well, yeah, of course, right? But what if he doesn't like manufacturing at all, but he does like the familyness thing that was created or the family enterprise? Could he go in and run the charitable component or the real estate development component? But yeah, it's so much. I think it's so much more. It's like a couple of things I wrote down. One thing that I think you hit on that we talk a lot about to business owners, and I think is really embraced by the family enterprise, is that your operating business is just another asset in your overall portfolio.
Yeah.
So family or not, right? We always teach that it's likely your largest asset.
Yep.
But it should be treated as another financial asset in the overall portfolio. And I think that's, kind of a core concept here of what a family enterprise is.
It's so key though, because if you're a CEPA and you're advising a family, you're looking at their entire portfolio. If the operating entity, we don't have a vision for how to grow it, we're tapping out in its valuation. The ability to look at that from a yes, it has a core intrinsic value to our family, no doubt about it. But to take that hat off and acknowledge and look at it as an investment, if we as CEPAs can help our clients do that, at least we're making a proactive decision. Maybe it does make sense to grow this thing for 3 years and then sell it. Or sell it now, or sell in 10 years, or whatever, never sell. But at least we're having honest conversations about what is the wealth creation capability of that asset. I get it's been in our family for a couple of generations, and that's tough. But the interesting thing I was just thinking about, your buddy, so that one of the challenges also is with guys like your buddy whose parents, grandparents, grandfather, and then father, what do they value? They value your ability to get in the shop and make the donuts, to drive the truck, to fix the truck. They're the guys that walk in. I've seen it. You've probably seen it. You walk in a factory, the machine breaks down. The old guy walks over. He's looking around. He kicks it here, tweaks it there, and then the thing's running.
Yeah.
And that's a special sauce. That's great. And they want to see that of their kids too. The challenge is, if you're not growing, that's great. You're just going to have that. But if you want to see the family grow, that's the challenge. Is at some point. The question I was asked, are we going to let this business outgrow our wingspan, or is it going to be limited by our family's wingspan? And if we've got to have family leading it, and the family's got to be the one who knows how to fix that machine, then its growth is limited.
It is. It's not. Yeah, you can't scale that.
You can't scale it.
So one of the other questions I had for you, kind of related to what you're just talking about, I find a lot, maybe that's not true, and maybe it's just my own experience, but you tell me what you think. A lot of the times in the family businesses, they teach the craft. So Joe's dad says, son, I'm going to teach you how to work this CNC machine.
Yep.
Here's the engineering plans. This is how we're going to create it. And Joe can do that nowadays after being, there since he was probably 12, sweeping the floor, all the way to a guy in his mid-30s now helping run the company and working with clients. He could tell you how to make their product for sure.
Yeah.
But the struggle that I see in my friends that have these next generation family businesses, so I know how to make that thing. I know how to drive that truck. I could rig up any piece of equipment. But what the hell's a P&L? And how do you handle this? Where do you hire your people from, man? And how do you handle this human resources issue or sales and marketing? Shoot, look at my hands. I'm not an office guy.
Yeah.
But now, since dad is, fast forward another 10, 20 years, dad's 80. He's out of the business. And it's on you, and it's almost like a crash course. I just always wish that dads or moms, basically Gen 1 to Gen 2 or Gen 2 to Gen 3, would teach their kids about the craft and the business. I just don't see it happening enough.
I think you're right. A, it doesn't happen enough. B, the question is, what do the grandfather and father value? What do they really value? True. They really value being in the shop and being able to fix that thing, get it out. And I remember being in this was a third generation family business. They were doing their first ever strategic planning session. And we were like a half an hour in, and the old guy is sitting there, and after like a half an hour of strategic conversations, like he explodes. I can't take this. This is absolute BS. We need to be in the factory. Yeah. Who's running the factory? Yeah. Why aren't we? So, and so it's a challenge. And either, if we're going to grow, the bottom line is if we're going to grow, we've got to bring additional skills and capabilities. And if the family member is going to have, we're going to have to hire outside, or let's just be honest. We just want to maintain. We don't want to be bigger than 20 million or 40 million, whatever it is.
Right.
And that's not necessarily bad.
That's so true too. In other words, using these guys are going to kill me. I'm going to see them like at the bar this week. Like, dude, you're talking to this family expert and you're using me as this guinea pig example here. But hey, guys, I'll buy you a beer. But one of the other things I thought was super interesting, and I haven't heard this before. Again, they're younger. They're about probably 6 years younger than me. And they're third generation, where I guess you could say that I'm second generation, if you will, right? And one of the biggest things on my brain, because you're talking about a $20 or $30 million company, is, so what's your legacy, right? So like in our business, you could compare it the way I said was Peter Chrisman and Rich Jackham started the Exit Planning Institute back in 2005, wrote the book, The $10 Trillion Opportunity, and Pete, Rich, and along with a couple other folks in the industry, you could say are kind of like the founders of what we now call exit planning and an exit planning professional. Then my dad came in, so that's their legacy.
Yep.
My dad came in and said, okay, I want to take these original concepts, and the missing piece is a method, like a process that we can turn easily and it's simple to understand so that advisors and owners can come together. Yeah. That's Dad's legacy. He's the creator of the methodology. So what's your legacy, Scott? So when I asked that question to those guys, I said, like for Joe, for example, super Midwestern, typical kind of manufacturing story. His grandfather started the business out of a shed in the backyard. Yep. Grandfather his legacy is I took the shed and made a 30,000 square foot manufacturing facility. That's what grandfather did. His son, so Joe's dad, takes over, and I'm paraphrasing Joe if you're listening, but I said, well, what's your dad's legacy? Well, he said, my dad would probably lean into, I've taken it from 30,000 square feet to 75,000 square feet and taken that. And I'm like, well, where the hell are you going to go, Joe Jr.? Yeah. Where are you taking it to 150,000 square feet? Or it looks like, because I know where his place is, looks like you're kind of landlocked. So I don't know, where are you going to new markets? Yeah. Him and then Rick had the same thing. And they said, for me, it's about maintaining my father's and grandfather's legacy and balancing my life so that I could be a good dad too. Wow. Right? So I challenge that. I think it's meaningful, and we're all like, oh, what great guys. Yeah. But at the same time, for me, a business that's not growing is dying. So I'm not saying you got to grow by hyper 25% growth, but a company that just kind of maintains, there's eventually, I think, starts to go down. So I think the challenge is still, your legacy just can't be to maintain that thing. There's got to be, what's the impact? But I always think that's interesting too, because I think it's hard. Like, that's a hell of a run. What's your run? How are you going to beat that? Right?
So I would agree with you. It's a great point. I would agree that if we're not thinking about how to grow and change as a company, we're in deep trouble. Right. Like you guys did when you could try to hold on to in-person events and you'd be you wouldn't be here.
We wouldn't even be business.
So distinguish between what it means to grow and change and adapt to the environment versus go from 30 to 70,000 feet to 120,000 feet, because those are different things. Right. And but 100%, as human beings, we have an opportunity to grow and change as humans. Some of us embrace it, some it's harder, but whatever. And then as a company, what's his legacy? Great question, because what is our core purpose as a leader here? Mm-hmm. Yeah. What is this thing all about?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And it was something that, again, when we went out to lunch after that, and they're like, dude, this rocked my world, this exit planning stuff. I'm like, exactly. This is exactly what it's supposed to do.
What's your legacy?
So my legacy is I'd like to see the value acceleration methodology taught in colleges and universities. So so when you go get your undergrad, you learn value acceleration. You learn that exit planning isn't something that you do when you're ready to exit. It's just a way of life. Like Dad calls it the value acceleration methodology. I would call it living a value acceleration centric lifestyle, which balances your business, your personal and financial, and has you always prepared for whatever that end might be, because you have those 5 Ds, right? That these things that destroy your company, involuntary. You have opportunities that come up. And I'd like to see more business owners not necessarily just tied to their business. I think we will see that with next generations. But that's long term, right? That's like the BHAG, if you will, the big, fat, audacious goal. I think my legacy, perhaps in short term or maybe more reality, is the certified exit planning advisor growth, becoming the gold standard in the industry. So when people think, I need somebody that can teach me, that can help me, that can pair me up with great advisors in the multiple areas of the exit planning ecosystem, that could really help me go from an income approach to a value creation approach, and really help me balance business, personal, and financial to have this more significant exit, not just a successful one, if you will. They turn to the CEPA, they turn to a certified exit planning advisors. I would hope that when my run is gone, they go, Peter Chrisman and Rich Jackham started talking about it. Chris Snider created the methodology that allowed people to engage, and Scott Snider and his team grew the community. So now everybody's using a CEPA. There's a CEPA on every team. You're almost like a CVO, a chief value officer. Yeah. So in part, I'm still molding it.
I like it.
So 2 things I want to talk about before we have to wrap the show. So, and I mentioned them because I think they're important to the audience, because there were 2 things that were important to me, and me and my dad still talk about them today, and you hear me talk about them all the time. Talk to me about voice versus vote. Yeah. And then talk to me about fair as an equal. Yeah. I love fair as an equal. Voice versus vote, you can get fair as an equal. You're kind of like, wait a second, isn't fair wait, what is all that? Yeah, so go voice versus vote, because I think it's good if you're a family owner listening, listen to this. Yeah, and I think it works. It's a critical concept if we're working with family members, but frankly, it's a critical concept for any parent. And the framework is, it's almost like a quid pro quo, whether we're brothers working together, father, son, whatever it is, that we understand that there's someone in the room who has the final say. That person has the vote. And if we can all buy that, because that's a legal reality. In the course of a business, that is a legal reality. Yeah. That is a reality. And in the case of families, talking about their estate plans, it's mom and dad's final call, but there's someone there who's got the final call. But the quid pro quo, the deal would be, I found, that can be constructed in the context of families or discussions about money, wealth, estate planning, whatever it is that if we can acknowledge there's someone here who has the final call, and if it's in your case, Scott, we all buy that, and you are willing to give to those around you, either your employees or folks in your family that you love, a gift. The gift is a voice. Right. And if we both internalize that deeply and really, in truth, I'm thrilled that you're giving me a voice, because now I know you're listening to me. Mm-hmm. And the fact that you're listening to me, research, we all know intuitively, that matters intuitively. As humans beings, we need to know that. Secondly, if you internalize the fact that you've got the vote, we don't have to be in a debate. Right. I may have a great idea. I may have a horrific one. I want to take our money and start a lawnmower museum. Right. Yeah. Like, listen, Freddie, that's a great idea. Let me give it some thought. We don't have to be in a debate about it. You don't have to shut me down. You don't have to debate it. You can simply ask me questions. And the beauty of that is when we do that, by asking me questions, there's a special sauce that's happening. We're developing trust and our relationship. And at the end of the day, that's what it's about. Because where does your real influence as a leader, as a family person in your family, as a leader in this business, it doesn't come from your ability to fire all the people sitting out here or tell them to go home or not to come home. It comes in your ability to influence them because you're in a relationship. Yeah. We have a friend of mine who talks all the time about, you think about just in terms of your kids, when they're 3, 5, 10, who decides how much time you spend together? And the answer is you do. Right. When they're 20, 25, and 30, who decides? They do. And the only hope I got, because I'm in that phase now where kids are all over 20, is that they actually want to spend time with me, is if we have a relationship. Right. And my only hope of influencing them about their lives is if we're in a relationship. I have zero power over them. I have none. Actually, I'm still paying the one kid's tuition. Yeah, so I got a little power there. Yeah, I got a little power there. But that's not a power you want to use. So anyway, So talk to me then about fair versus equal, or fair isn't equal.
Yeah, especially as we're thinking about, all right, what are we going to do with this family business? Who's going to own it? Who's getting the promotion, all that stuff, or even with our estate plan, our money. What we say is that number one, equals is a mathematical equation. We all know that 1 + 1 = 2. But fair is a perception. What I think is fair versus what you think is fair are two totally different things. Is it fair you got a cup of coffee there and I got stuck with some cold water? That ain't fair. Like we can go like, it's a silly example, but we can go deep with that. And if we can acknowledge that when we're talking about complex things, like what am I going to do with this business? How much are you getting paid? How much are you getting? What are we doing with our estate? It is really hard to be perfectly equal.
It is. Absolutely. Especially if there's multiple siblings and all kinds of good stuff.
Exactly.
People in the business, people out of the business.
So fair does not mean equal. But what we can do is we can have discussions about perceptions. What are your perceptions? This is my estate plan. This is what I want to do with the business. This is what I'm thinking. Let's talk that through. And if we honor that some of the folks in the room have a voice and some have a vote, and we really honor that, then we can have a tough conversation that needs to be occurred about what are we doing with our business? Are we keeping it? Are we selling it? What are we doing? Once we sell it, we're going to have a bunch of money. What do you want to do with that? Who's got the call? What are your thoughts? What are my thoughts? It can be a game changer.
It is. I mean, taking those two concepts, and again, for me and Dad, and I think I probably told you this, but one of the things I admire about my dad in recent time, like in the last few months, is that we had our first family meeting, right? So we brought my brother-in-law, my sister, my mom, right? And we all kind of had a conversation about his estate plan that he wrote up and how everything is getting divvied up. And there's definitely some fair isn't equal there for sure. But I mean, luckily we have a good family that's kind of all stuck together. Yeah. But it was, those key concepts that we bring into our own family that we're taught by you certainly does help. Yeah. So I want to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about your role in all of this, right? So I've been pinging you as the expert, but if you're a family business owner or you know of a family business, Mike actually can come in and help. So we haven't talked about that. So I want to take a quick break. We'll talk about that next.
Great.
Stick with us.
For business owners, by a business owner. Walking to Destiny is your essential resource for understanding what makes your business highly profitable and significant. It becomes a business owner's handbook to know how to rapidly grow value and ultimately unlock the personal wealth trapped in business. Exit Planning Institute CEO Christopher Snider demonstrates how strategic exit planning will help you achieve improvements today while positioning you to build wealth for generations. Secure your success along other value creators. Discover, prepare, and decide what your walk to destiny will ultimately be. If executed correctly, these strategies can grow a business owner's wealth by 10 times. Walking to Destiny, the second edition, the 11 actions an owner must take to rapidly grow value and unlock wealth. Get your copy today at www.walkingtodestiny.com.
Welcome back, guys, to the Exit Is Now podcast. So we've been talking all kinds of different family concepts and all kinds of different, I guess, what I would say like this 25-year run of Mike's career inside of this of family business and enterprise. One thing I didn't want to leave out of the show is, for me, every time I talk to Mike, I'm always motivated. I always got like ideas flowing and everything. And if you're an advisor that has a family or you're a business owner that has a family and you're like, man, those are cool concepts that I think might bring father and son, mother and son, or the whole family unit together, there are a whole slew of advisors like Mike that exist to actually go do this. So can you just talk to me about that role? There's a couple things that come to mind. A, how do I know when to engage a guy like you, right? Like, okay, I have a family that might need something like this, but how do I know when to call Mike? And then when I do, what does that look like when you come in? Because I always think it's got to be a mix of strategic business with like psychology. Yeah. Because if you got to be coming into sometimes some pretty hairy situations.
Yeah, they can be hairy. We're not therapists. Like, we're not digging to the past. We're looking forward.
Right.
But one of the things that we believe, and we've spoken about this, and I did a talk in Scottsdale with you guys about it, is that you talk about 3 legs of the stool, and there is a 4th leg.
Right.
And we haven't formalized it, but I would argue it's out there. And because there's a certain line of psychologists said this, I forget who said it, but it's very hard to understand an individual. If you put yourself in a CEPA, your client, in absence of understanding their family, his or her family. So understanding humans as and your clients more deeply and profoundly is also about understanding their family, where they came from, their background, and also those around them. And if you think about our roles as CEPAs, as advisors, we look at our client and we think that individual is really our client, but in reality, we are making decisions and advising him or her about things that are going to have a tremendous and broad impact on those around him or her. So it's not going to just impact an individual, a man, a wife, a spouse. It's going to impact their kids. And frankly, if we sell for a lot of money, it's going to impact their kids for generations to come.
100%.
And you might have kids working in the business who are suddenly not going to have a job. The point is, it is not, we want to expand how we as advisors think about who our client is. And our wish would be, as you look at your client, actually think of a hologram of all the individuals, spouse, children, grandchildren around him or her. We are dramatically impacting their lives. Therefore, we need to understand how we are. Because we all know that our spouses have a huge impact on us. And if the spouse is against the sale because they don't want their kid to lose a job, whatever the reason is, not silly, whatever the reason is, we need to understand that. You asked, so if we can kind of buy that, I don't have to be a family business advisor to be able to dig into that and ask questions of my client. Have you thought about how this is going to impact your spouse, your kids? What are their thoughts about it? To fail to do that misses a big part of what's driving their decision making. As advisors, we say this all the time. We'll sit down with a client, and they're not making progress. They said they're going to do X, and they're not doing it. Your job is to dig in and ask why 2, 3, 4, 5 times, get to the root of it. And some of the time, not all the time, but some of the time, it's tied to some family-related issues. And if that's the issue, then it's time to reach out to someone like me or others on the team that work specifically in this area of where family and business mix together.
Yeah, family and business combined.
Yeah.
So when you get in there, like you're doing, I would assume, some type of assessment, right? You can't just come in cold, right? So you come in and you're sitting down with a family unit of people, or maybe just a father-son team, whatever it might be. And what are you kind of looking at? Like, how do you start that relationship?
So we start with what I preach, looking at the family as a system, the family business as a system, and to understand it, I need to understand all the parts. So I'm going to talk to the founder, the individual who owns and operates it, his or her spouse, the kids, if there's other brothers involved, because they are all having an impact, whether it's 2% impact or 98% impact, they're all having an impact. I want to understand that. And I want to get also to another framework, which is, we talked about fair is not equal, voice, vote, but wish and fear. And one of the things that we always dig at with folks that we work with families, is getting to this idea of wish, fear. When you see a client, it's a heads up, like someone in your life you love, your fiance, fill in the blank, your father, someone out here, if someone's getting pissed off, underneath that anger, men get pissed off easily because it's a great way to push people away. Don't have to talk about it. Underneath that is some wish or a fear. And if we can get the person out of the anger and helping them identify what's the core wish, what's your concern there, that's a way to change the conversation. But also, even more importantly, more broadly, is we want to understand wishes and fears, the real ones, for everybody in the system. And then combined with, all right, here are the wishes and fears, the hopes, wishes, et cetera, concerns. This is the direction we want to go. How do we make that come together? Understanding there's some folks who have the vote and some who have the voice. And we can give a bunch of people a voice. At the end of the day, you know what? We're still going to move towards sale. We're going to do it in 2 years, 10 years, whatever the issue is.
Yeah, so I would assume you're facilitating conversation too, right? We're between all of these concepts.
Exactly. We're facilitating conversations. Voice and voter is a tool to facilitate that conversation. Wish, fear is a tool. Fair does not equal. If these are frameworks that we can buy into, we can have constructive conversations about where we want to be as a family, what we want to do as a business, who's accountable for getting this done. If this happens, then what? Our job is to create an environment where we can actually have safe conversations, talk about our wishes and fears, and then make a decision. and make
right.
a decision.
At the end of the day, it's got to.
At the end of the day, it's about we got to move. Are we going left or are we going right? And there's someone in the room's got the final call. We want them to be able to, here's the bottom line. We want them to be able to make that call where they're going left or right, selling 10 years, 2 years, never, whatever, and still have Thanksgiving dinner together.
I know, right?
And if you do
be able to hang out outside of the business.
Exactly. Because you know why? I mean, at the end of the day, if you can't do that, what are we doing this for? Like I'm blowing up my family and destroying relationships.
Well, it has to be super purposeful work. It's probably why you've stuck around for so many years within families, because if you get it and you get it right, like you got to have people that you still kind of like know and hang out, almost befriend. Because like Mike changed our family's life by simply unlocking some key concepts that allowed us to have better conversations and frankly understand each other. Again, you pinged me with that question, what issues did Dad and I have years ago as we were building into a what I would consider pretty successful father-son relationship and team? And we both probably the wish and fear. We both probably had wishes and fears where we didn't talk about those types of things.
Yeah.
And that was, and it took us down the wrong path because we just simply wouldn't talk about that. But we didn't know that, right?
Bingo. So, and that, you don't have to be a shrink psychologist to have that conversation and push. Here, the trick is being able to gently push and massage, particularly folks who really haven't thought about it because all their wish or their fear is covered by anger or frustration or shut up, I'm going to do it, by hierarchy, whatever. To actually get them to the core, the root of it. And the real wish is, that my kids are going to still, come hang out at the beach house.
Yeah.
Or the fear is, what am I going to do if I sell this thing? What the heck am I going to do? Who am I?
Right.
If I'm selling this business and my identity's tied up, who am I if I'm not running this business? Which is a tough, it's important to know. If I'm a CEPA, I'm investing time and energy. It's important to know that.
Well, Mike, it's been great. I appreciate you hanging out. I hope everybody enjoyed the show. So thanks for coming on. Our next show is up on November 8th. So please subscribe, listen, and leave a review on all of our podcast platforms. Mike, thanks for the trip in, man. I really appreciate it.
Great to be here. Love doing it.
All right, guys. Awesome. We'll see you next episode. Talk soon.